Lahore Literature Festival, this is a major feature in Pakistani's cultural calendar. And last year in February, it was the last big public cultural event in Pakistan before COVID struck. It's heartening that it takes place this year again, albeit still due to the pandemic, digital. So poetry and literature can once again enlighten and enchant us all, and that's very great. We here at the German Embassy have tried to be supportive for quite some time, and we did so again this year in fostering the digital edition. As you might have seen, that this year one of the main panelists will be Jürgen Schaflechner from the Heidelberg University, by the way, the same university Allama Iqbal studied. And Dr. Schaflechner's participation in this year's festival testifies to the rich history of German-Pakistani cooperation in letters, science, and research, of which we are very fond and which underpins our political, economic, and diplomatic relations, which, by the way, turn 70 years this year in October. Names, as to name but a few, Annemarie Schimmel, Wolfgang Völter, Ruth Pfau, and many others stand for this rich mutual German-Pakistani enrichment. And the topic Dr. Schaflechner will talk about is likewise utterly important: the artistic and societal rank of the Hindu Hinglaj temple in Baluchistan. We all know how important the relationship between Muslim majority society and its minorities is. In fact, the treatment of minorities, as the founding fathers of Pakistan never ceased to insist upon, is one of the litmus tests of Pakistan's democratic and republican credentials. So what Dr. Schaflechner has to say in his talk matters to a great deal. I'm very much looking forward to his lecture and, of course, to the rest of this lovely festival. So stay tuned.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sikander Bizenjo. Welcome to the Lahore Literature Festival discussion on Hinglaj Devi. Today we have a brilliant guest, Dr. Professor Jürgen Schaflechner. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Dr. Jürgen is a research group leader at the Department of Social and Cultural Anthropology, Free University, Berlin. He and his team study the political and social movements of religious minorities in South Asia in the advent of social media and communicative capitalism. Jürgen's research and teaching cover culture and post-colonial theory, the religious and ethnic minority in Islamic Republic of Pakistan, the socio-anthropology of martial arts, and the role of documentary film in ethnography research. We're very thrilled and proud to have him in one of the shows here. Thank you, Jürgen, for your time.
Sure, I'm excited to be here.
How are you today?
Oh, I'm great, thank you. We're in the middle of winter here in Berlin. Since a long time, there is a lot of snow outside and a little bit of sun, so that's good. But otherwise, you know, it's lockdown. It's a pity.
I can totally relate. In Pakistan, in Karachi specifically, where I'm sitting, it's winters as well. See my T-shirt?
Where are you? Which part of Karachi are you presently?
I am sitting near the airport.
Oh, okay, I get it. Oh, I miss Karachi, really, particularly in this winter time.
In the winters, yes, it gets very cold, man. Jürgen, we are here to talk about your book, to be specific. So if I go with the name of the book, that is Hinglaj Devi, Identity, Change and Solidification at a Hindu temple in Pakistan. Identity, change and solidification. What does it mean? What does it entail?
So the title basically tries to emphasize three of the main points that I think are interesting in this with this shrine, right? So under identity, I try to show how important this place has been for so many centuries, so many years, up till now, to so many different communities. And when I mean different communities, I mean, over caste boundaries, geographical boundaries, language boundaries, and even, religious boundaries, because Hinglaj under the name of Nani is also important, at least it used to be, and to a certain extent it is still today, for Sigri Muslims in Balochistan and also in Karachi. And this kind of importance got mixed, and that's why we come to the name of change, got mixed through a variety of events. The most important of those being the construction of the Makran Coastal Highway, which suddenly connected, and very recently connected, this kind of very distant, hard to reach, aloof shrine with probably a very, very long history of ritual practices to urban centers, to Karachi, to Hyderabad, to the world, so to say. And so this change led to, and this is where we come to the third term, to a form of, or a dynamic that I could not describe in other terms than in a dynamic of solidification. So what we witnessed over the last, let's say, when I started the book, maybe 3 decades, now maybe 4 decades, is the solidification of one particular tradition in Hinglaj that took over all of these many different interpretations of what the shrine was.
Thank you for those insights. Jürgen, you mentioned the geographical change, the Makran Coastal Highway. Can you paint us a picture what it was before this highway? How people traveled there? How was the journey for all the yatris there?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So first of all, because most people, the first thing that I get asked is about the actual age of the temple. And it's kind of interesting because it's really hard for us to pin it down. There's so many different ways or lenses or frames for which we could look at the time frame and this place, right? So one of them, which I think is the most important also for the Hindu community, would be in Sanskrit corpora, right? The problem is Sanskrit usually is extremely difficult to date. So you could say, if you look at the Puranas, parts of the Sanskrit corpus, which is very important for religious Hindus, you could say, well, the place might have been mentioned already in the 10th or the 15th century, right? But then we have the problem of, is it this very place? When the name Hinglaj is mentioned in its different varieties, is it the place in Balochistan, or is it actually a place that could be also in the Himalayas? So it's very difficult to date through these kinds of Sanskrit corpora. But what we know is, or what is very likely, is that there has been a continuous ritual practice of people walking through the desert to this place for many, many centuries. And so I think that this is kind of the most interesting part of this place, because Hinglaj always used to be very important in the oral histories of certain communities, of certain castes. The Charans, the Brahmakshatriyas, also Bengali communities very often relate to Hinglaj, Kanpata yogis. So as I mentioned before, it's a very aloof, very distant, very difficult, or even difficult to find. So it's now about 250 kilometers away from Karachi, if you go towards the east, and then maybe 16, 17 kilometers north inland from the Arabian Sea, right? Now it seems pretty obvious, you have signs, you have the roads, but at that time you have to imagine people very often didn't really know where to go. They set out, walked from Karachi, walked from the next kind of, urban civilization, you could even say, and then started their journey on foot with the help of camels into the desert. And this journey was a part of this kind of spiritual experience where you very often read in texts that the burning heat of the sun and the burning sand under the people's feet is substantial for burning out the sins of the pilgrims. And so this continuous walking, which very often went on for 2 weeks, 21 days, until people reached there, depending on if they found it on the first attempt or not, was a way to purify them, so that when they reached there, this is what people believe, they reached that they could actually see the goddess. They actually saw the goddess welcoming them in her house, right, in her place. So this is substantially different than how it is today, because now the last time I went, it's probably 2.5, maybe 3 hours, depending on how fast you go down the Makran Coastal Highway. You can reach very quickly, and so this change is very important for the different understandings, the different also bodily understandings, the physical effort that one needs to do to reach this place, right? And this had a variety of effects and huge impact on practices, rituals, and narratives as well.
I think that's brilliant that you summed it up so well. For a layman like me, the most surreal part of this whole journey would be the walking journey. And I'm sure for the yatris as well, for the pilgrims who are going for this journey, the walking bit, at least in the old times, at least 3 decades before, used to be the highlight of the entire thing, because that's when they reach to the final point, they feel welcomed by the gods. Do you think for them it has changed even more? Because now even them, they are taking cars and just 3 hours drive from Karachi, and they're doing the yatra and they're back. Or do you think there are people who are still walking during this time?
Again, it very often depends on whom you ask. I think that there has been a certain devaluation of the actual achievement of reaching the place, because you in older oral histories that then have been documented, the oral histories of the Charan communities, so a certain caste in Sindh, mainly in the western part of India, you hear that people have been called Hinglajis very often. Now you find this title still in Pakistan. So, log kehte ki hum haj karke aaye hain, hum Hinglaji hai, theek hai? So you hear this very often, but the association with this term is different, I think, today than it was then. You have to understand that then, when you came back from such a journey, it was you were the gift of the goddess given back to your community, because people just did not know if you would ever be able to come back from such a difficult and dangerous journey. So when you were a Hinglaji, your life had changed. You did this pilgrimage. It was very difficult to do it. So like many other pilgrimages, I think we find in other religious traditions, in Christian tradition, in Muslim traditions, you were a different person. The pilgrimage kind of was written into your face, into your expression. Your social interactions changed, right? So this has almost but ceased. I would argue ceased completely, even in Pakistan, simply because of the ease with which you're now able to reach this place, of course. Because before the desert, the heat, the difficulty, the difficulty of finding the place, the difficulty of finding water, food on the way there, all of these things kept and excuse me if I'm very pragmatic here, but they kept the pilgrimage, the achievement, the reaching there elite to a certain extent. So if everybody is able to reach, then you find a devaluation of the idea of the Hinglaji, right? Because if one person out of a million would be able to do this and come back, it's a different story than if, everybody would be able to go, to just buy a bus ticket, go have some friends and so on. Now, the curious thing is that this tradition of the Hinglaji and its connected social upward mobility, meaning that you go to Hinglaj and your position changes in the society, whatever this society might be, your small village society, your neighborhood, urban society, the society within your caste, your jati, your baradari even, whatever it is. This change and this social upward mobility is still there in India. So there is this one, sorry for the blatant self-advertisement here, but there's this part of a film that I did many years ago where I accompanied a group of Ahirs from Gujarat, India, who did this journey, who got, the visa, flew to Karachi, got a bus, did the whole journey and everything. And for them, in fact, the journey is still associated with the social upward mobility. They are still Hinglajis. And you see tangible changes in how not only they treat it in this life, but also in the afterlife. Because as you know, many, not all, but most Hindus would burn their deceased on the pyre, right? It's a tradition. Only a few people would be buried in samadhis, holy people, for example, sadhus, people who led the community. But these Ahirs, these Hinglajis in India, when they come back, they would not be burned on the pyre anymore, but instead they would be buried in a samadhi. Wow. And they in fact then get worshipped. Whatever, how you ever want to, remembered maybe might be a more accurate term, remembered by their ancestors, by their family, by their village community in these samadhis. And this is actually there that you actually really can see this in the film. So I accompanied them through Balochistan, and then a year later came to their place in Bhuj in Gujarat to see how their lives changed. And it's true, these samadhis are there. Now, there is a certain correlation. I'm not saying it's causality, but there's a certain correlation which I think is very interesting here. One could assume that while the desert before was the reason that kept the symbolic capital, the power of this pilgrimage, elite, as I said before, this kind of characteristic is now taken on by the border between India and Pakistan. In the same way as not everybody is able to go to the desert and come back alive, in the same way, not everybody is here, even though there are so many people who actually would love to go to Hinglaj, are not able to go. So those who come back, they are a few, and so they are treated in a very different kind of way. Right?
That's a very, very interesting notion that the whole desert pilgrimage is almost equivalent to crossing the border. That's right. As well for our countries. We should be more harmonious in this sense. Jürgen, you have to put your video link in the chat when we go for the final thing on the Lahore Literary Festival Facebook and wherever this is being telecasted. So please do that, or we will do that in the comments so people can watch that film and go through the journey as well.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
You mentioned the pilgrimage, even in the ancient times, in all the religious notions, it's related to suffering. Suffering in a way that you're learning, you're getting out of your comfort zone, you're learning in a different atmosphere. Do you think this notion has changed across all religions, given that the time we are here right now, with our cars, with our airplanes, with our facilities, our Google Maps and everything? Do you think the whole notion has changed?
It's a good question, right? So the motto of this and so many other, I think, pilgrimages in this wonderful and beautiful, sacred landscape all over South Asia, right? So South Asia is, you have a form of a version, a pre-Google version of Google Maps all over South Asia, where people mapped the subcontinent, through places, that they wanted to go, different communities, Nanda Devi, Shabas Kalanda, Abdul Latif, and so on and so forth, right? So there is certainly a different conception of space then than it is now. And the motto for this and so many other pilgrimages is this, Jitni taklif utna fayda. No? The more you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it, absolutely. So you're right in a certain sense that this has changed, and this is not new. If you look at writings, for example, I remember the writing of Abadhut, who wrote on Morotir to Hinglaj, who wrote on the Hinglaj pilgrimage already in the middle of the 20th century, who already lamented many, many decades ago that, at that time it was the railgari, it was the train. It was like, we walked and we had nothing but the blisters on our feet and the love of and he talks about the Hindu tradition, the love of the goddess on our tongue, and we met certain communities, friends on the way, and so on and so on. And now we sit in the railgari, we sit in the train, we go from A to B. So you're absolutely right that this is there, that this has changed. But, and this is the interesting part of it, it doesn't mean that it has changed in the sense that it's not there anymore. Because in the example of Hinglaj, for example, I can tell you that the idea of having to do a certain form of effort to reach the goddess is still there in Hinglaj to this day, but it has shifted. So while now it's not the desert, maybe, because you buy a ticket, you sit on the bus, you go to Hinglaj, and you might not find the goddess there, and people are lamenting this. I remember speaking to one yatri who said, when I was there the first time, when we came in the 70s, there was no bathing in the springs. There were no people having picnics. There was just puja and arti and meditation and so on, right? And now when you go to the village, there is this other place, Anilkund, which is up into the mountains, which is a walk of 2.5 hours. Not pleasant, beautiful, not pleasant in the sense that it's actually a real hike. So it's effort again, huh? It's taklif. You need to put something in there. And so some of the people that I met there said that if you want to meet the goddess, you need to go up there. So it shifted, right? And another thing that shifted is, and I think I found this extremely interesting, that with the construction of the road, it's not that the walking tradition ceased to be, it was actually revitalized, right? So you could say that after 65, right, after the war, 65, when the border really got more and more rigid and many inflows of people from, Gujarat, Western India, and so pilgrims ceased to come, there was a certain drying out of the rituals and basically the fluctuation, people coming to this place. And after that time, in the 70s, when people started to again go there by car, by camel and so on, and then in the 80s, when it got institutionalized, you see that more and more people come. But then what really revitalized the walking practice is the construction of the road, right? So it's so interesting because suddenly people were not afraid of getting lost anymore. They were not afraid of not having any water anymore. They were not afraid of going astray somewhere. They just follow now the Makran Coastal Highway. So since the construction of the road and since the Hinglaj Shiva Mandali has spread the knowledge of Hinglaj, more and more people want to walk again, right? So there are new traditions. While before it was very rigid, you needed to have an agua, a leader, you needed to have at least, one camel carrying the food and the groceries and the water. Now it has become easier. So what people now would do in a very, very creative and wonderful way, as I think, is people would push a little cart. So from Narayanpur, from Ranjha Lines, a community that I accompanied, they built their own little cart with the murti, so the statue of the goddess on there, a huge speaker, where they're blasting, music and chanting and Jai Hinglaj Mata Ki Jai, and they push this, and this is, so to say, their taklif. So, long story short, you're right, it changed, but this idea that you need to put a certain kind of effort into a spiritual experience, into kind of your way to get closer to, the divine, whatever you want to call it, is still there, but it has changed, right? And the road has not completely stopped it, but it has just produced more creative ways of trying to experience this kind of divinity, right?
The endurance you mean is still there, but in a very different capacity that it was before.
Absolutely.
Let's go into the temple. You mentioned Arti, you mentioned Puja. I've also heard, I haven't seen, but I've heard there's a tunnel in the mandir as well, which is used, or which is seen as a purification of the soul. Would you mind talking about what's inside the temple and what makes it different than other Hindu temples in Pakistan, for instance?
Sure. So the Hinglaj is special and particular in the sense, not only for other places of Hindu worship in Pakistan, but all over South Asia, all over the world, in fact, because the circumambulation, so the circling around of, the sanctum sanctorum, the holiest, things that you not only have in Hinduism, when you go to a Shabbos calendar, there's also a circular movement there. Go to the Kaaba, there's a circular movement there. this circular movement is done in Hinglaj through, as you said correctly, a tunnel. And that's very unique and very curious, I would say, because so I need to do a little detour to come to this point. I hope you excuse me. So the idea of the holiest at Hinglaj is this idea that the murti, the statue, where you can actually get the darshan, you can see the goddess, and the goddess can see you. So that's the important thing. So you see and you're seen. So this idea that this murti there is so particular has to do with this idea of Swayambhu. Swayambhu is, as you know, from the Sanskrit of bhu, coming, emerging, swayam, out of itself. And this basically means that there is this tradition within a lot of communities in South Asia where people say they have seen the goddess. She emerged, or Shiva, any deity in Hinduism, out of itself, Swayambhu. So the Sanctum Sanctorum, the holiest, is a stone that actually looks like, or people have interpreted as either the head of the goddess, the upper part, the Brahmarandha, so this part, or the womb of the goddess, depending on whom you ask, again, right? And we can talk about this a little later. But why is this important for the circumambulation? It's important because this part has come out of this overhanging cliff, which is there probably thousands of years. We don't know how long. The tunnel, even though it has now been made with masonry and people have extended it, but the actual core of the tunnel is this overhanging rock above which this murti, and this is, I think, the oldest part, and it would be very, very, very interesting to actually figure out how old this is. It's really difficult to get this from paratexts, from textual sources. Oral histories make it impossible, you know, the longer back you go in time. So you probably would need to have an archaeologist looking at this to figure out how old it is. Probably very old. But the idea of going through this little kind of tunnel is associated with the narrative that because it's small, and I did it myself quite often, and it's very small, so you really need to squeeze yourself through there. And so this performance has been interpreted for many, many, many years as a rebirthing out of the goddess, the body of the goddess. And since the idea is that the murti is Swayambhu, made out of itself, so the stones have been there for a very long time, it is understood as being reborn out of this stone, out of the body of the goddess, and thus becoming a devatma, as the Gujarati tradition would say, a divine soul. Now, colonial reports from the middle of the 19th century still report that this practice was associated with the pilgrims, the yatris, coming out of this tunnel and rolling on the floor and making baby sounds and crying out for their mother, right? Which is this way of not only, you know, mentally going through this pilgrimage, but physically going through the rebirthing, which is the main kind of peak, the climax of this pilgrimage. Now today, there are different traditions that connect to this ritual. Different traditions have different understandings. As I said before, some people even would claim that what you see there is actually not the head of the goddess Sati, the upper part that in mythological times fell scattered all over the South Asian continent, and one part is in Balochistan, but that they would say that this is the womb. And so parts of what you see are actually parts of her legs, where you then come out of her body, right? So there are different traditions. But most traditions agree on this idea that this is somehow a new start for the pilgrim. It's somehow a new birth, a new chance, right? It's a little bit like, if you allow me this comparison, like an Etch-a-Sketch, right? Where you have all of your deeds are painted on, and then this long journey, this pilgrimage and the rebirthing give you the chance to make a tabula rasa again, right? And then come out as a newborn. I stop here, but there's so many more things about that I attach to this ritual. But
so many questions that I have to ask you, but I don't think I have that much time. But I would love to do it some other time. But for now, there are a few burning questions that I have to ask you. The burning question in my head, because I've been thinking about them. So I've studied a bit. I'm from Balochistan as well, so I'm naturally curious, but even in generally in Pakistan, you're curious as well. So we hear that people from Karachi, people from Bengal, people from Gujarat have done this yatra. I'm just curious that is Hinglaj well known in other parts of India? Is it very significant there as well? Do they know that this mandir or this place, this temple exists in Pakistani Balochistan, which is very significant to their religion?
Absolutely, absolutely. There are people in Bengal, in Orissa, even a flame in one of the most important temples in Orissa is called to be the flame of Hinglaj. Yogis, the whole tradition, the Kanpata yogi tradition, for them it's the most important place that they could go to in South Asia. So a lot of people long to go to see this place. I think most, but one of the most important communities, the Charan communities in Rajasthan. In Rajasthan, when I traveled Rajasthan and I met people, devotees of the goddess, and I talked to them about that I have seen this place. I mean, this is now a few years back, but it still has not changed. When I told them I've seen this place, they sometimes took my hand and put my hand to their head, because they were like, you are yourself a gift from the goddess because you came from there, right? So there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, maybe more, trying to go and see this temple. Absolutely. Until Bengal, until I got an email from devotees from the United States as well, all over the world. So it's a very important place for a lot of people.
And this is known by the same name everywhere.
Yes and no. So Hinglaj has become now, through this kind of solidification, like the main name, but Nani Mandir is the name where more local communities, and I think also in Balochistan it's more known under this name of Bibi Nani.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, thank you. I think that definitely answers this question. The second question for me would be, I think a lot of people in Pakistan in general, we are disconnected with different religions. We are in our own zone. How important do you think is it for us to explore the other areas that exist in our country, the other religions that exist in our country, to make our country a more inclusive place? How important do you think this is?
Well, I think it's very important. I mean, it was on the very foundation of this project. The idea for this project that I got from one of my professors at that time about this particular shrine was that I was interested in seeing a Pakistan which is a little bit outside of the usual kind of security concern, political science, terrorism kind of discourse in which Pakistan usually emerges. I mean, if you look at many of the titles of the books there, what is wrong with Pakistan? How can we understand Pakistan? Pakistan, the crisis state. So most of the publications on Pakistan for a long time, of course, after 2000, after 9/11, this became particularly significant. But I wanted to write a book where where you have a very different Pakistan, where you have Pakistan in the title associated with a lot of words that usually don't go together, like Hindu temple in Pakistan. And I can tell you now, fortunately, with the help of very good colleagues of mine, this has changed, and the study of Hindus in Pakistan is now a little bit more out there. But when I started my research for the book almost a decade ago, the biggest reaction was, oh, there are Hindus in Pakistan. Yes, of course, there's so many Hindus in Pakistan. It's more Hindus in Pakistan than the United States, So absolutely. So to answer your question, I think it's extremely important to explore these things. I think it's extremely important to look at history, and this history of coming together, living together, having different names for the same things, the same places very often. So I would really encourage, particularly the young anthropologists, male and female in Pakistan, to explore, these, because for us it's difficult, the language, you need to learn the language, you need to get a ticket. Then because of Corona, you might not even be able to go, do your research. So I would really love to see more anthropologists from Pakistan working on Pakistan, right? That would be lovely. And there's so many good people out there who do it.
For sure. I think that's a brilliant message. I hope young anthropologists watching here would take note of this thing and go and explore this historical site. We keep mentioning the historical site, that it has a very big significance. Would you mind telling us very briefly about the religious significance of this site? You have mentioned Sati, you have mentioned the womb and or the head, but you mind telling it again for those who do not know the religious significance?
Absolutely. Of this? Sure. So the idea is that the general idea that has solidified, right? Because there are so many, and the idea of solidification is that out of these many interpretations, one emerges as being kind of the most legitimate one, the one that is the least contested today. But one of these stories is that the goddess Sati actually was married to Shiva. And since Shiva is an ascet and is not, well, very showable to your parents, and since Sati's father was a great king, the father wasn't very happy. Why would you do this? Why would you hang out with this person who is only wearing fur, and is half naked and only meditating all the time? So when the king had a huge party at that time, huge parties were associated with rituals, the Ashwamedha rituals, invited everyone but Shiva. So Shiva didn't really care because he was happy with his meditation anyway. But Sati was really upset. So she thought that her father disrespected Shiva. And so the only thing how she could protest was jumping into the Yagyakund, the place of the ritual fire where all the guests, the nobles and the aristocrats, came out of his meditation, came to this place, took the body out of grief. And this dance then scattered all the parts of Sati all over South Asia, all over what then was Bharat. And one of these parts, apparently the upper part, this part, fell in Balochistan. And so when you go there today, you will see, most importantly, a part of a face that is also, with vermilion, because of the name, is painted on the stone. But this is, so to say, the most often told story about this place.
Fascinating. Thank you for shedding light on this. I think because of the lack of time, I just want to ask you one last question. I have so many questions, so we should do this again. One last question for now. How long or how much time have you spent in South Asia? And how did you learn Urdu or Hindi? And would you mind saying a few words in Urdu?
चलो ठीक है. मैं पहले दफा पाकिस्तान गया था 2006, ठीक है, 2006. लेकिन उस वक्त मैं बनारस में रहता था, वाराणसी में, संस्कृत पढ़ने के लिए. तो मैं असल में संस्कृत पढ़ता था 6-8 सालों के लिए तकरीबन, ठीक है. लेकिन पाकिस्तान जाके 2006 में मैंने देखा है कि इतने सारी चीजें हैं जो बहुत दिलचस्प है, सही है. तो उन चीज़ों को देखना, उन चीज़ों के बारे में तहकीकात करना, ये मेरा मकसद था उस वक्त, ठीक है. और जब मुझे PhD लिखने का जो क्या कहते हैं इसको, क्या मौका मिल गया था उस वक्त, तो मैंने मेरे प्रोफेसर को बताया कि मैं सारा पाकिस्तान के ऊपर कुछ काम करना चाहता हूँ. उसने मुझे ये बताया है कि वहाँ बलूचिस्तान में ये नानी मंदिर है, इसके बारे में कोई किताब बिल्कुल अभी तक नहीं लिखी गई है, तो आप इसके बारे में कुछ काम करें, ठीक है. 2009 से 2015 तक मैं इसके लिए तहकीकात करता था. पाकिस्तान में, पूरे सिंध में, मतलब लोगों से मिलने के लिए, ये जो मरवाड़ी बोलने वाले लोग और भील, ये जो जैसे स्केड्यूल कास्ट लोगों को कहते हैं, लोहाना लोगों से मुलाकात करने के लिए. इंडिया में भी गया चारण लोगों से मुलाकात करने के लिए. और इसको मतलब ये जो इनकी जो कहानियाँ और ये जो रीति और रिवाज है, उसको मतलब कलेक्ट करने के लिए मैं गया, और ये इसका नतीजा है यही किताब हिंगलाज वाली.
This is such an amazing Urdu, man. This is really.
It's very kind of you. It's very kind of you. But I'm actually embarrassed that I forgot so much of it in this. Because the last time I was in Pakistan was in 2019. There was no chance to go with the corona and the lockdown. It's next time. Next time it's going to be better.
Thank you very much, Jürgen, for such a candid discussion. Our viewers can write their comments, write their questions on the Lahore Literary Festival LLF's Facebook page. We can share it from our platform, Global Shapers Karachi, as well. I think this is very much needed a topic and a discussion, and also an image of Pakistan that not a lot of people outside Pakistan knows, that Pakistan is such a diverse and inclusive country as well, that it's not just home to one religion, but it's home to everyone who's part of this land. So thank you very much for shedding light on this.
Thank you.
With this, we'll end the segment here. Thank you very much, Jürgen.
Thank you so much. Thank you for giving me the chance to talk about this. Thank you.